Hello. I want to welcome you to session 14, and here we'll continue discussing wealth at the point where we left off in the last session. Despite the fact that the wealthy have been successfully waging class warfare against the poor and the middle class, while redistributing the wealth significantly in their favor, and I do mean significantly in their favor, we still see too many of those who are in power, or are still with great influence, continually misrepresenting the facts. And many of them, those who make up the very wealthy, have in the past done their best to make it appear and to make us all believe that they are the victims and that the family with the lower income is getting the best deal. I'm really serious. It wasn't all that long ago that they tried in the past to make us believe that the family with the lower income was getting the best deal, or at the very least, as good a deal on the tax breaks as the wealthy family. You may ask why they do these things in such an underhanded fashion. One answer is that they know that it would be much easier to pass the laws to reduce taxes for themselves if they make it appear that the average family will really be helped by their small rebate, and so they appeal to the average voter's sense of need to get any few dollars of help that they can to cause them to vote for getting the laws passed that will cut taxes so bountifully for the wealthy. They don't tell you that they'll later take it all back and more, as I've mentioned, to buy higher prices to families for groceries, gasoline, natural gas, and heating oil, just to name a few. The price of gasoline has risen to more than $4 per gallon in the United States at one time, and when natural gas has at times gone up to by 48%. When have you ever received a 48% raise in salary? That's still another story, because these drastic increases in prices have been brought about by greedy speculators and not simply by supply and demand. Laws must be passed to stop this ruthless speculation that makes fortunes for the wealthy and creates unbearable costs for the average working family. Another less obvious answer regarding why the laws and the society are so very subtly structured by the wealthy and their politicians for the benefit of the wealthy and not for the benefit of working families is that they know that it's political suicide to say that they don't want everyone else's children to be as educated as their own, or to say that they don't want everyone to have a job with a fair living wage because it takes away cheap labor, or to say that they don't want everyone to have adequate health insurance, especially if some of the cost has to come out of their very deep and very full pockets. They don't want to be perceived as being against any program or idea that's popular with the people, especially at those times when there's an election coming up. Neither do they want to be perceived as favoring the wealthy, although almost everything they do tends to have that purpose. They in the past have made promises never to bother the Social Security program or Medicare, because in the past these have been the so-called third rail of politics. But they know that if they give a large percentage of the available funds to the wealthiest of the population as tax reductions, or if they spend it in the military budget or give it as a bailout to the bankers, then before too long, especially with the baby boom generation approaching retirement age, they'll simply be able to say, as they do today, gee, there isn't enough money available to continue to fund Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. They've known about these things for many years, but no one has been willing to do anything significant about it, because when the time comes, there are many of them who want to be able to say, we really want to continue to fund these important programs, but we simply can't, because there just isn't enough money left to do it. Don't blame us. It isn't our fault. That's what they want to say. They still want to privatize Social Security and provide some small token amount for health care and let seniors and others fend for themselves without Medicare and Medicaid, while health care costs from private sources continue to rise. The effects of Hurricane Katrina at that time, along with the later financial collapse and recession/depression of 2008 and beyond, gave them even more of an excuse to try to cut these important programs, along with many other programs. A staunch backer of the very wealthy, a man named Grover Norquist, who's the founder and president of the Americans for Tax Reform, has been quoted as saying, quote, "The goal is to starve the beast," meaning the government, which he's talking about is a beast, "with trillions of dollars in deficits resulting from trillions of dollars in tax cuts," and I would personally add, and in wars, and continuing the quote, "until the United States government is so anemic and so anorexic that it can be quietly drowned in the bathtub." The result, of course, would be no taxes at all for those who earn so very much, and no government regulation that might cost them a few dollars of profit. In addition, they want states' rights, so a weak federal government will have no power to tax or regulate them for fairness in business practice, to make them adhere to rights and safety for employees, or to help employees be paid a decent living wage for their labor. They can then go to live and or do business in whatever state has the most lax business regulation and labor laws. To carry it a bit further, as I mentioned previously when discussing taxes, maybe they'd like it even better if there were no federal government. Just 50 separate countries instead of states. And they could pass their own laws and fix their own Katrinas and wage their own individual wars, even against each other. It would be everyone for themselves, with the rich and powerful having everything and the rest of us having nothing except whatever crumbs they decide to throw to us. Is that the kind of country you want? That's kind of the way things are tending to be these days. Neither do I. But I do have an important question. Why are so many of you still voting for these people? Again, your reaction is likely to be, well, why would they for any reason want to do such a thing? The answer is simple. It's for the same reasons that when they were in power politically, they made every attempt to appear to be doing something to help the job situation, but it kept getting worse. Excuse me. Even though they kept telling us how great things were. Haven't you ever wondered in the past why before the economy tanked at the end of the George W. Bush administration, that when on those rare occasions when the number of jobless actually went down, the stock market would fall? One would have thought back then that such an event would have been good news. But the stock market fell because the jobless went down. Because when there's a high jobless rate, people are willing to work for less. Now today, of course, with the economy doing poorly, improvement in the jobless numbers is cause for an uptick in the stock prices. But that hasn't always been the case. The almighty dollar, or even more so, almighty profit, is the God before whose altar so many of these people bow down and worship. Take great care lest you become one of them, or take even greater care if you are one of them. The main reason behind all of this is the fact that all these things work together for the same purpose: to reduce the cost of labor and therefore increase the profitability of the corporate structure, thereby increasing the wealth and power of the extremely wealthy elite in this country who are so very heavily invested in the success and high profits of this corporate structure. Excuse me. As a result, it will also increase the disproportionately strong influence that the ultra-wealthy can then continue to wield over the country, its politics, its media, and of course even its workers. If people are less educated, if more people are out of work, if fewer have health care, then there are far more people waiting in line for the next available job. And if the person first in line doesn't want the job at the low wages, the jobs are even more and more often at a lower salary, and they're either temporary positions or part-time positions and without benefits, then there's going to be plenty of people lined up behind that person who will be glad to have that job under any circumstances and at virtually any salary. That's the way they like things to be. In addition, those who are working, even though they are probably doing the work of 2 or 3 people, the work that 2 or 3 people used to do because of downsizing and other factors, they're far less likely to complain if they are working, to risk losing their jobs, because we all know that decent jobs of any kind are becoming more and more scarce, and no one wants to join those who are on the outside looking in. In order to keep the status quo, those at the very top are highly skilled at carrying out the old adage that almost always works when you are vastly outnumbered. Divide and conquer, or divide and rule. As long as they can continue, as they have for a very long time, to keep the whites against the people of color, the Democrats against the Republicans, the men against the women, those of one religion against those of another religion, and that's one of the easiest because people feel so strongly about their faith, those with one point of view against those with another point of view, then the vast majority of the people are so preoccupied with these differences in their everyday lives that they're never really aware that all of this is being perpetrated and perpetuated by those at the very top, who know that they have so much to lose if the situation should ever change, that they feel they must continue to do it out of necessity, their necessity. Time and experience have been very effective teachers for those who seek to gain and hold wealth and power. They've been able to maintain their control over the masses of the people who greatly outnumber them by effectively exercising, as previously indicated, the time-proven adage, divide and rule. Now you know why the country and its people are so very divided and polarized. A relatively small number of people are exerting a vastly disproportionate influence on our media, and therefore much of public opinion, on our politics, and therefore much of our government's policy, on our educational system, our business, our industry, and so on ad infinitum. The more educated we are, excuse me, the more difficult it is for them, their children, and even their grandchildren to continue to perpetuate these conditions. So we find that those who can afford the ever-increasing cost of higher education, which are generally the children of the affluent and wealthy, are the ones who get into the universities. Far too often, those who cannot financially afford to do so, no matter how brilliant they may be, unless they're fortunate enough to receive one of the few scholarships available, they won't have the opportunity for the kind of education that they deserve and should have. Our country is being deprived of the contributions that countless numbers of people might be making if they were able to receive a quality education that challenges and stimulates their intellect. This must change. The way for it to change is for the people of this country and the world to come together. It's time for those who sit back or hesitate because they wonder what one person can do to find out what one person can do. Before you know it, you become two people, or half a dozen, or 100, or 1,000, or even tens and hundreds of thousands of those who make up the decent and caring people who in turn make up the vast majority of Americans and other citizens of this world. You'll find out very quickly what can be done when vast numbers of like-minded people come together in a nonviolent way and demand real change. Thank you for watching. In our next session, number 15, we'll talk about what can happen when people don't come together. It's not a pretty picture. Thank you for watching. Thank you.